Welcome back to Airgun Academy. In our past episode, we looked at some basic maintenance for pneumatic air guns. For this episode, we'll look at some basic maintenance for CO2 air guns. Most air guns do not need a lot of maintenance, and CO2 air guns are no exception. Knowing how to operate them and store them safely is the most important part. Carbon dioxide gas is commonly abbreviated as CO2. In this video, I'll be talking about guns that use CO2 cartridges that come in 8 gram, 12 gram, and 88 gram sizes. I will not be addressing guns that are filled from a separate bulk tank, though many of the maintenance procedures and safety precautions are the same. We'll have a separate Airgun Academy video on bulk fill CO2 guns in the future. Before we get started, let's talk about disassembly. Firearms are made to be disassembled for cleaning purposes. That's not so with air guns. If you try that with them, you'll probably ruin them. It's not unusual for CO2 guns to be damaged during improper disassembly. So if you have a CO2 gun, don't take it apart. But if you have, and it needs to be fixed, you should contact the manufacturer. The most important maintenance step you can take with any CO2 gun is to add some Crosman Pelgun oil to the mechanism when the CO2 cartridge is installed. This special oil gets into the inner valve spaces and onto all the seals, where it helps seal the gun against the intrusion of dirt. If you can't find Crosman Pelgun oil, the best substitute is 20-weight non-detergent motor oil. However, it lacks the special O-ring preservative that Pelgun oil has. If you're using CO2 cartridges to power your gun, put a drop or two of Pelgun oil on the tip of each new cartridge before it's pierced. You can also oil the mechanical mechanisms on your CO2 guns so they operate smoothly. Regular household oil is good for this. However, if you do oil your gun, don't get carried away. Too much oil will attract dirt and gum up the mechanism faster than no oil at all. If you do decide to oil it, remember to do so sparingly. CO2 changes pressure as the ambient temperature changes, and it works well in air guns, but only in a narrow range of temperatures. If you're aware of what that narrow range is, that's part of maintaining your CO2 air gun. It may not sound like maintenance, but it really is. CO2 is a refrigerant gas. As it passes through an air gun, it absorbs heat from the air gun's parts and cools the gun. When the ambient temperature is comfortable, say 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, you don't notice this phenomenon. But when the temperature drops, it can become a problem. When the temperature is below about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, CO2 cools the air gun as it's fired. But it can't recover from this because the air that surrounds it is also cool. In short, your CO2 gun won't have much power when it's fired rapidly in cold weather. On the other hand, when the air temperature is about 90 degrees, the gas pressure inside a CO2 gun increases to the point that the valve will no longer function properly. The internal pressure becomes so high that the hammer cannot open the valve. The gun may even suddenly fail to fire if it gets too hot. Just laying a gun out in the sun on an 80-degree day can cause this increase in pressure. So keep your CO2 guns in the shade if you want them to work properly on hot days. If your CO2 guns aren't working on a hot day, get them out of the sun. Once they cool off, they should go back to working properly. Here's a very important safety tip you need to remember. Never, ever store CO2 or CO2 air guns inside of a car on a warm day. CO2 cartridges have no safety burst valve to prevent a catastrophic explosion when their internal pressure becomes too great. And they've been known to blow the windows out of cars on warm days. The final maintenance tip I'll cover is one that can confuse new air gunners. Most owner's manuals tell you to remove the CO2 cartridge after you're finished shooting and want to put your gun away. The reason is because CO2 guns can stay pressurized for years. If something falls into the barrel and the owner dry fires the gun, it can discharge whatever is in the barrel with the force of a pellet. Essentially, when there's gas in the gun, it's always loaded. But if you try to remove a gas cartridge that's not entirely used up and the remaining gas pressure has fallen off, the cartridge will exhaust liquid CO2 at extremely high pressure and freeze anything it comes into contact with. And by used up, I mean that all the liquid CO2 inside the cartridge has been converted to gas. Needless to say, you can be seriously hurt if liquid CO2 freezes your skin. So, always wait until the CO2 cartridge is running very low on power before you remove it from the gun. This is easy to do with an 8 gram or 12 gram CO2 cartridge because they usually get only about 50 shots per cartridge before they run out of gas. A few BB guns that shoot at lower velocities can get over 100 shots in a small cartridge, but they are the exceptions. However, if your gun uses an 88 gram cartridge, the amount of CO2 they contain is much greater. Guns that use these cartridges typically get hundreds of shots before running out of gas. Just remember that there's no way of removing these cartridges without exhausting all the gas. You can do it safely, as long as you keep your fingers away from the gas when it exhausts. But keep in mind, you'll be wasting a lot of CO2 every time you do. So think about this before you charge your gun. If there's a lot of gas left when you exhaust the cartridge, remember, it can be cold enough to cause extreme frostbite. So please, use caution. In this episode, we took a look at maintaining CO2 air guns. So, let's recap the main points. There are 3 different sizes of CO2 cartridges: 8 gram, 12 gram, and 88 gram. All of them need to be oiled with Crosman Pelgun oil before they're pierced, and 20-weight non-detergent motor oil can be used as a substitute. You should never attempt to disassemble a CO2 gun. They simply aren't made for disassembly. You can lightly oil the moving metal parts of your air gun, but do so sparingly. CO2 operates within a temperature range. If the ambient temperature is below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the gun may not develop much power. If the ambient temperature is above 90 degrees Fahrenheit, the gun can fail to fire because the internal pressure is too great. That being said, don't leave guns lying in the sun because they may not fire as a result. And don't leave guns in a hot car because they can explode. When you remove a CO2 cartridge from your gun, do so carefully. The exhausting gas can cause severe frostbite. Keep on watching, and we'll help you find the right air gun for all your shooting needs. And check back for future episodes that deal with different air guns for a variety of uses. Thanks for watching Airgun Academy. Stay tuned for another great lesson from Pyramid Air.